Okay, so we will start now, and I will request all other participants to mute their microphone. Nishat, please start.
Okay, Assalamualaikum and good day everyone. Welcome to the international webinar on Russia-Ukraine war. Today, Center for Peace Studies of North-South University is extremely honored to have two Nobel laureates in the webinar. They are Honorable Jody Williams, who is the recipient of Nobel Peace Prize in 1997 for her work to ban landmines through the international campaigns to ban landmines, and Sir Richard John Roberts, who is the recipient of 1993 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for the discovery of introns in eukaryotic DNA and the mechanism of gene splicing. On behalf of North-South University, I cordially welcome you both to today's webinar. Thank you very much for joining us. This webinar is jointly organized by the Center for Peace Studies, CPS, of South Asian Institute of Policy and Governance, known as SIPG, which is a think tank in the area of policy and governance in Bangladesh, and the Daily Prothom Alo, the largest circulated newspaper in Bangladesh. The chair of the webinar is respected Vice Chancellor of North-South University, Professor Atikul Islam. Today, we also have Mr. Azimuddin Ahmed, Chairman, Board of Trustees, the North-South University Trust, Mr. Matiur Rahman, the editor of Prothom Alo, CPS members, faculties and students, media representatives, officials from government and development agencies from home and abroad. This is Ishwar Zakia Sultana, faculty of North-South University and member of CPS. I thank all of you for your virtual presence in this very special program. I'll be moderating today's program. I'd like to take the advantage of saying a few words about CPS at the beginning. CPS began its journey in peace promotion and peace building through organizing an international conference on the Rohingya issue in July 2019. The Center, an interdisciplinary initiative under SIPG, serves as a platform for academics, researchers, and practitioners from diverse academic backgrounds working together to create a peaceful world with a focus on sustainable and inclusive solutions for contemporary humanitarian crises. Currently, CPS has 21 members who have been actively engaged in evidence-based and empirical research. One of the greatest achievements of CPS is conducting 3 certificate courses for different professionals from home and abroad in 2021 and 2022. These were on humanitarianism, policy, and diplomacy in collaboration with Bangladesh Institute of Peace Support Operation Training, the Rohingya crisis in collaboration with the University of Arizona, and geopolitics of peace, pandemic, and development in collaboration with O.P. Jindal University of India. CPS believes in action, human security, and peace. From that point of view, CPS always tries to involve people across the world. Today's webinar is one of the many initiatives of CPS on building a resilient society. Before I share the outline of today's webinar, let us pause for a 1-minute silence in contemplation, prayer, or reflection to remember those who have died in conflicts and wars in this world. Thank you. Thank you very much. So the way we planned today's webinar is to begin with CPS member Professor Hilal Mohiuddin to briefly introduce the respected Nobel laureates. Then we will hear the keynote speech from Honorable Jody Williams. We expect to hear from you for approximately 25 minutes. After that, our special guest, Sir Richard John Roberts, will share his short comments, and we expect to hear from you roughly for 10 minutes. Then there will be a question answer session for about 20 minutes. In order to best utilize the time for the Q&As, I request respected audience to type their questions in the chat box. We will try to address as many questions as possible, but my apologies in advance if we leave some questions unaddressed. After the question answer session, we'll hear from Mr. Azimuddin Ahmed, Chairman, Board of Trustees of North-South University Trust, and Chair of the webinar, Professor Atikul Islam, Vice Chancellor of North-South University. The webinar will end with the closing remarks from our partner, the Daily Prothom Alo's editor, Mr. Moti Rahman. May I now request Professor Hilal Mohiuddin to introduce our keynote speakers and the special guest.
Good evening, the audiences in Bangladesh. Good morning, distinguished guests in the United States. We, the members of the North-South University family, are honored to extend our warmest greetings to Honorable Jody Williams, the keynote speaker, and Honorable Richard J. Roberts, the Nobel laureate in medicine, and the discussant in today's auspicious event. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Honorable Mr. Azimuddin Ahmed, Chair of the Board of Trustees, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Atikul Islam, respected editor of the Daily Prothom Alo, Mr. Moti Rahman, and audiences in Bangladesh and abroad. I am pleased to introduce our honorable guests in few words. Jody Williams is a world-renowned personality in the area of global peace activism. She and her campaign received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1997. In the 80s, Jody Williams graduated from the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies in Washington, D.C., and engaged herself in activism in Nicaragua, Honduras, and El Salvador. In October 1992, with the cooperation of 6 international organizations, Jody Williams coordinated the launch of the international campaign to ban landlines, with the mission of abolishing the use of anti-personnel landmines. Jody lectured widely on the dangers of landmines, presenting the proofs of tens of millions of unexploded landmines in more than 70 countries. Her campaign accomplished one of the most historic peace treaties of the 20th century. In December 1997, the Mine Ban Treaty was signed in Ottawa by more than 100 countries and ratified by 130 countries in the following decade. Jody Williams wrote a memoir, and her memoir, My Name is Jody Williams, A Burman Girl's Winding Path to the Nobel Peace Prize, is a poignant account of peace activism, which every peace activist should draw insights from. Jody co-authored the book titled After the Guns Fall Silent, The Enduring Legacy of Landmines. The book examined the socio-economic impact of landmine contamination in 4 countries. She also co-edited the book titled Banning Landmines, Disarmament, Citizen Diplomacy, and Human Security. In 2007, Jody was appointed to lead a United Nations high-level mission to investigate human rights abuses in the war-torn Sudanese region of Darfur. In the same year, she joined the faculty of the University of Houston's Graduate College of Social Work as a professor of peace and social justice. Jody Williams received more than a dozen degrees and was named by Forbes magazine in 2004 as one of the 100 most powerful women in the world. Welcome once again, Jody, for considering to enlighten us with your insights. At this point, I am delighted to introduce Honorable Richard J. Roberts. Roberts was awarded the 1993 Nobel Peace Prize in Medicine with Philip Allen Sharp for the discovery of introns in eukaryotic DNA and the mechanisms of gene splicing. In his autography, Roberts wrote that he wished to be a detective, but later revealed his advanced research passion in biochemistry and molecular biology. Richards worked in University of Sheffield, Cambridge, and Harvard Labs and the New England Biolabs. Roberts was awarded the Golden Plate Award of the American Academy of Achievement and Lomonosov Gold Medal of the Russian Academy of Sciences. He was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society and a member of the European Molecular Biology Organization, EMBU. In 2005, a multi-million-pound expansion to the chemistry department at the University of Sheffield and the science department at Beechen-Cliff School were named after Richards. He had donated a substantial sum of his Nobel Prize winnings to the latter school. Roberts is a member of the advisory board of Patient Innovation and has been a keynote speaker at the Congress of Future Medical Leaders for 6 years. He also is the chairman of the Laureates Science Alliance. Roberts is an advocate to advance health in developing countries through genetically modified organisms in general and golden rice in particular. In 2016, Roberts and other Nobelists composed and signed a Laureates letter supporting precision agriculture, what we know as GMOs, addressed to the leaders of Greenpeace in the United Nations and global governments. Thank you, Roberts, for your time. So before I hand over to Dr. Ishrat Jakia, the moderator of today's event, I want to say once more on behalf of the Center for Peace Studies of the South Asian Institute for Policy and Governance at the North-South University, welcome. It's very wonderful to have you with us on this memorable day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Mohiuddin, for introducing our respected guests. I know our audience is eagerly waiting to hear from today's keynote speaker. Now I invite Honorable Jody Williams to present her keynote speech titled, "Is War Inevitable? Can We Change the Paradigm?"
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. I wish I were actually here in Bangladesh, but maybe next time. I don't know about you, Rich, but whenever I hear myself introduced, I wonder who people are talking about. I'm an activist. I've been an activist against war since the Vietnam War, which at that point was a war of aggression against the people of Vietnam, as Mr. Putin's war is a war of aggression against the people of Ukraine. I bet for as long as there has been conflict and war, which probably is from the moment human beings began to exist, the question has been, is war inevitable? With the aggressive war in Ukraine, I think for many of us, too many of us, war has suddenly been recognized again as the threat it is, and especially with the overlay of the nuclear threat. In the West, people choose to forget that Myanmar's conflict continues. The genocidal efforts of the Myanmar Burmese army has led to Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh and other parts of the world. Wars continue in the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. Sudan is not in great shape. We could go on and on and on. The difference between the invasion of Ukraine and the rest of these wars is that Ukraine is white people. Ukraine is in the West. It is a war of aggression on the European continent again, which totally freaks people out. But people around the world have been suffering from ongoing conflict. If we care about the people of Ukraine, we need to care about every conflict in the world. As long as people are suffering in war, we have an obligation to pay attention to that, no matter where it is. Ignored wars, in my view, contribute to the ongoing belief that war and violence is an answer to something. In my view, it is only an answer to the desire for power of either an individual, as in Mr. Putin's case, or a government overall. Which brings me back to the question, is war inevitable? I think it is inevitable if we choose to believe that it is inevitable. If we accept that it is inevitable, it is. The only thing in my view, and I've now been an activist for, 4 or 5 decades, geez, I'm crow, I'm old. But we have to act to bring about change. We have to act to stop war. We have to act to stop nuclear threats of all types. You know, in all of my experience, people seem to shy away from the term activism. People seem to feel like it's sort of a negative, right? If I'm an activist, am I, hanging with the wrong people? Am I a secret communist? That was thought in the US when I was working in Central America. We were considered to be, secret communists. No, we weren't. We were acting for peace. The root of activism is simply to act. If we want to change the so-called inevitability of war, we must change our own belief that it's inevitable. And to do that, we cannot be complacent. We cannot sit back and wring our hands and worry when the next war will start, or when the Ukraine war will stop, if it will stop, or will Mr. Putin use nukes? Will Mr. Putin use tactical nukes? I didn't even really ponder tactical nuclear weapons until this war. And of course I've heard about them. But is this particular war of aggression making the use of tactical nuclear weapons more likely? Do we want to live in a world where tactical nuclear weapons are considered an appropriate weapon of war? Is war inevitable? It will be if people who want to live in proactive peace, which is different from negative peace. Negative peace is simply the absence of armed conflict. That is not real peace if the socioeconomic crises that peoples around the world are living in are not solved. We need proactive peace, pro-peace. We need to believe that we as human beings have the right to live in peace. Living in peace is a human right. I recall that a few years ago, I can't remember the year, I think it was the Human Rights Council. There was a resolution before it trying to establish that peace, living in peace, is a right for human beings. Well, you will imagine that the United States voted against it. I think it's Western allies abstained. I don't recall Russia's vote at that point because I was mostly agitated, but not surprised about my own country. We have a right to peace. handfuls of people, a person such as Mr. Putin, corporations who want to rape this planet and continue to destroy it with fossil fuels, which of course Russia is a big part of the fossil fuel issue. We cannot allow a handful of people, however big that handful is, to determine the fate of this planet, the fate of humanity, the fate of every living thing on this planet. War, as I said, is only inevitable if we allow it to be so. If we sit back and wring our hands, as I said a bit earlier, we're in some ways complicit. People hate it when I say that. But if you do nothing and you are silent in the face of something horrible, human rights violations, economic deprivation, starvation, poverty, if you are silent and inside you think it's horrible, that's completely irrelevant. It is irrelevant to emote about an issue if you do not have the courage to take a stand, make an act, join organizations that are working on things that make you stay up at night. If you really believe, as I do, that when somebody else on the planet suffers, I also suffer. Obviously not. Oh dear, my computer's gonna stop. I have to move people before my computer dies, but I'll keep talking. I believe that if we allow human rights violations, war, hunger, poverty, etc., it does affect each and every one of us. It makes it okay. It isn't okay. Oh God. I'm just moving around my house to work, but I'm sorry that this isn't as you see. We see Buddha in the background. You see Buddha? Buddha is an example of giving up worldly goods for the greater good. I could go on and on, but I think I shan't, because my message is pretty clear. Everyone is capable of making a difference. Everything we do every single day is a choice. Every choice we make has an impact, not only on our own lives, but on other people's lives, even if we're not aware of it. If we do not want to accept the so-called inevitability of war, we have to fight to make sure that the wars in the world today are the last wars. To make sure that people do not accept the ridiculous theory of deterrence and mutual destruction of nuclear war. That is accepting insanity. Is it not insane for a handful of countries to have nuclear weapons and just sit back and think, oh dear, they won't use them because, you know, if he uses them, then he will use them. So, you know, it stops use. Well, Mr. Putin is demonstrating that that might not be the case. Get up, act, make the world a better place for everybody. Get up, act, stop nuclear weapons. Get up, act, stop allowing war to happen as if it's inevitable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Judy. This is quite liberating, powerful, and inspirational. I think people who act to uphold or establish peace, they all will agree to what you said at the beginning, that war and violence is the answer to the desire of power. And that is why silence is really irrelevant when people suffer. Thanks for the reminder, Judy, as you said, that everyone is capable in making a difference. Now, may I request Sir Richard John Roberts to share his comments on this war. I think you need to unmute the mic,
Yeah,
sir.
I have.
Thank you.
Okay, I need to share my screen. I trust that will be okay. I just have 3 slides that I would like to share with you. Can you see the first one okay?
Yeah,
Yes.
it's there.
Okay, so what I really want to do, I don't believe war is inevitable, and I think we can change the paradigm. I'm 100% behind Jody on that. But it takes activism. And I think Jody has been a prime example all her life of how activism really can work, can help. I think during the Vietnam War towards the end, when the students in the US got on the streets and told the government to stop, that was a wonderful example of activism. And it shows something very important. And that is that young people can make a huge difference. Young people are the future of this world. They have in their hands the opportunity to do something. Greta Thunberg, who is a climate activist, has had a huge effect. Students who get up and speak can have a big effect. And I think it's very important that we actually teach young people that activism is not only okay, but is a good thing. Now, when I won the Nobel Prize, I had been an activist all my life, but no one had really listened very much to me. And the one thing that I discovered that I really had not expected was that when I won the Nobel Prize, that afterwards people were asking my opinion, and not only were they politely listening, but sometimes they would follow. And I discovered fairly early on that there was a great benefit from Nobel laureates getting together, making statements, talking to powerful people, talking to powerful individuals. Hello, is that me causing a problem? I hope not. Anyway, I discovered that it was possible for the Nobel laureates, just by signing statements, sending them around, to encourage other people to act. And I think, as far as I'm concerned, and this particular Nobel laureate support for Ukraine is a good example, that there are so many people who have written and supported this, who are usually fairly widely respected within their countries, within their communities, that this will enable others to act. The message is being spread quite widely. Now, the idea for this particular letter originated with Roald Hoffmann, who is a chemist, and someone who's been very active himself, but not usually from a point of starting something, but rather signing on to things and encouraging things. And he wrote to me and he said, would I consider joining with him to circulate a letter and to get some Nobel signatories? We now have 204 Nobel laureates who've signed up. That's out of a worldwide total of about 300. And you have to remember that there are quite a few who I don't necessarily have up-to-date contact information for. So I'm anticipating that number will go up. And if you go to this website, you can find at any moment exactly how many Nobel laureates have signed on. We circulated this quite widely. Personal statements from the Dalai Lama, from Jimmy Carter, from Barack Obama are included. A good article in The Economist about the campaign. And I think it's already had some quite significant effects. I spoke not too long ago on a Zoom call to the presidents of the National Academies of Science in Ukraine and Moldova, because Moldova are also very concerned that if Putin really does have his way in Ukraine, Moldova and other countries will follow. And one of the things that I was talking about with them is that they have not given up hope, that they have a number of their young scientific colleagues who are very keen to help in every way that they can. Everyone I've spoken to in Ukraine, and I know a number of people there, are all adamant that they are not going to give in. And I think already we are seeing the effects of that, that the Russian that their attacks on Ukraine have not been as successful as they were hoping. For any normal country, they would have given in already, but the Ukrainians are tough. And I think they are doing a wonderful job. I'm going to talk next week to students in Ukraine who are still managing to do science, to do their work, to continue not a normal life, but something that approaches a normal life. They are not intimidated by Putin in the way that many people are. I was particularly touched by the extraordinary gesture made by Dmitry Muratov, who was a Peace Prize winner recently. He is going to auction off his certificate and the medal, and he's going to give the proceeds to help Ukrainian refugees. Here is a man who ran a newspaper in Russia, has been the subject of many, many harassments. He's the editor of one of the dissident newspapers there. And for him to do this in such a public way, I thought took extraordinary courage and was a very good example of what one can do, of the messages that one can send if you want to be active. Now, I would echo something else that Jody said, is that we have to get away from nuclear weapons. We have to disarm. And I always find it very disappointing when countries such as Britain, which is where I am from originally, were recently thinking about whether they should renew their nuclear weapons. A number of us spoke out quite strongly against that, and yet the Brits decided they were going to do it anyway. What a great moral failing. The French too have the same problem. I don't know who the British and the French think they're going to be fighting with their nuclear weapons, unless it's one another, because of course there has always been some consternation in relations between the Brits and the French. But if anybody were to set an example, here would be a wonderful example to say, we're going to disarm, we're going to get rid of our nuclear weapons. I thought there was a tremendous mistake that was made during the Cold War when Gorbachev and Reagan met in Iceland, and both leaders went to that meeting thinking that they were going to call for a vast reduction in nuclear arms and also the possibility of eliminating them completely. What a wonderful example that would have been. And what happened? The CIA at the last minute convinced Reagan not to do it. He went there thinking he was going to do it, as did Gorbachev, and they failed miserably. I think this is more meetings need to be held so that we really do get rid of nuclear weapons. And I think no time has been more appropriate to give us that lesson than the fact that Putin is now raising the threat of using nuclear weapons if he doesn't get his way in Ukraine. And what's happened? The West have been extraordinarily weak in answering that threat. That has been enough to tell Putin he can really do what he wants to do, because everybody is scared of that threat, as they should be. Nuclear weapons are just awful, and there is no excuse for using them. And in this particular case, the nuclear armaments of the US and Russia, if only a fraction of them were to be used, it could see the end of civilization as we know it. I think this is a lesson that needs to be broadcast widely everywhere. And we especially need the young people to get onto the streets and to say enough is enough. We have to stop this. One other lesson that I've learned from this crisis is the ineffectiveness of the United Nations. The fact that the Security Council includes Russia, who are able to veto any sensible measures that might impact their ability to wage war and to threaten people. I think we need to rethink the United Nations. One had always hoped that after the Second World War, that the United Nations really would serve a useful purpose. For many years, I think they have, but it's quite clear now that they do no longer serve that useful purpose. I think the time has come to also think about reorganizing an organization that we perhaps don't call the United Nations, but call it something else that really can be effective in bringing nations together and making it quite clear that the aggression that we've seen from Russia attacking Syria, attacking Ukraine is just unacceptable. This is not the way that civilized people behave. If the Russians want to think they're civilized, they have to stop this. So with that, I will thank you very much for allowing me to talk to you. I would also like to give a big shout out to President Zelensky, who I think has behaved with just amazing aplomb during this entire crisis. And perhaps there is a lesson there for all of us. Zelensky was a professional comedian. Perhaps we need more professional comedians serving as politicians. They seem to do a much better job than the current ones we have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sir Richard John Roberts. Thanks for your precise and insightful comments. And it's definitely a great initiative of having the Nobel laureates together on this issue, getting their support to stand beside humanity. I thank the audience for their questions and comments in the chat box. It is interesting to note that the curiosity of understanding the war has led our audience to ask quite intriguing questions about the possibility of reshuffling the power dynamics of the Western world as a result of this war, the effects of war on Europe as well as South Asian economy, building a world where dictators are not born, failing of the world leaders to forget enmity and embrace humanity, finding tools to create a new paradigm of peace, making the best of this war, etc. Since a good number of questions have already been raised, I will pass some of them now to our respected Nobel laureates. Just to let you know that we have diplomats, policy advisors, peace activists joined the webinar today from Bangladesh, so the audience may also ask questions to them. So one of the questions that drew my attention on the screen from Dr. Mustafa Abid, it asks, is it possible for Biden and his alliances to initiate diplomatic efforts to stop the war and convince Ukraine not to join NATO? Jody, would you like to take this question?
Well, as far as I know from following this relatively closely, everybody is trying to support negotiations to end this war. Last I knew, Russia and Ukraine diplomats, if you will, were meeting in Turkey to try to work something out. I haven't looked on the news yet today to see if they're still talking, but of course, people, entities, governments, UN are trying to end this war, this invasion, this mind-blowing invasion, and the, overt war crimes by the Russian military, specifically targeting schools, hospitals, civilian buildings. Those are war crimes. Not that the US has been innocent of war crimes in its invasions either, but we are seeing them daily. We certainly hope it ends with a ceasefire and Russian withdrawal. Last I saw, it seemed that Russia was thinking of repositioning itself in the area in the East, where of course it started fomenting violence in 2014, if I'm correct. And then of course, before his invasion, Putin declared those two areas as independent states and recognized them. Mind-boggling. Apparently, he's thinking about moving his troops there and solidifying that part. Hope isn't enough, as someone said. We must help support negotiated settlement. And I think that Russia should be responsible for contributing billions to rebuild the country it is happily destroying. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I see that there are quite a few questions from the students as well, particularly for Sir Richard John Roberts, but I will come to these questions in a moment. Let me first take another questions from the chat box for Jody again. It is from someone working in the peace building project for the Rohingya refugees in Cox's Bazar. So the question is, it is from Ifrat Zahan Ilora. So the question is, as Jody said earlier, how the West views conflict in Asia, Africa is different from conflicts in other parts. How Russian invasion of Ukraine changed the world order, and what are the impacts of those wars in South Asia?
If I could see into the future, I would be able to answer, how this war of aggression has changed, global power structure. Who knows? I think it in part will depend on how it ends. I want to see people, as I said when I spoke earlier, and by the way, I hope others here answer these questions, because I'm sure you all have brilliant insights better than mine. So please, everybody here, speak. Only in my view, until people really believe that war is not inevitable, that war is wrong, it is not okay to invade and murder. It's murder. When you attack civilians in war, it is a war crime. It's murder. It doesn't matter whether it's in Myanmar. It doesn't matter whether it's Ukraine. It doesn't matter whether it's a DRC. It's murder, murder, murder. One of the big differences that I think we're all noting is Ukrainian refugees are totally accepted in other countries in Europe. Apparently, some African students who were studying in Ukraine were not allowed to get on the trains to get out of the country. In my own country, the US, of course, we have people clamoring at the border of Mexico and the United States to escape the violence, economic deprivation, poverty, femicide. And what does the benevolent US do? It keeps the border closed. I mean, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, as people say. Please, other people here, please speak. Don't make me do it all. You all are brilliant and have ideas, and I'd love to hear them.
Okay. Now, Sir Rich Roberts, there is a question from North-South University students, and in this connection, I would also like to remind our audience that Sir Rich Roberts is an international advisor member of North-South University. So the question from Sadia asks, how can youngsters from this corner of the world contribute to refrain the invasion?
Well, I think the key thing that students can do is to take advantage of social media and their contacts via social media to make it clear to everyone what is actually happening. I think one of the big problems within Russia is that the regime controls the media. They put out propaganda that is simply not true. And so most of the Russian people have no idea of what's going on. Fortunately, there are still channels where one can send pictures, one can talk to people. And one of the things that you can do is to make sure that you use Telegram. If you don't already use it, it's a good idea to get an account, and make sure that the images that we see, the words that we see, the stories that we hear about what is going on in Ukraine is spread widely around the world. This is something that I think young people can do probably better, certainly than I am. I don't use social media because I'm not a great believer in many of the things that it does, but here is a time where it really can be very helpful and very useful.
Okay, all right, thank you. Let me share another question from another North-South University student, and this is an open question to both of you. It says, if world leaders were actually heartily willing to stop this Ukraine crisis right from the beginning, would it really have been such destructive? Does this portray a lack of strong will from the world leaders?
I'd like to say something, and then I want to invite Brigadier General to make a few comments because I see he had his hand up. So I hope you will share my time. I just want to say, if the world had not sat on its collective butt, if you will, and allowed the invasion of Georgia, had not allowed the violence in Eastern Ukraine, had not allowed the amazing annexation of the Crimea, Putin would not have done this. It is insane now that everybody is clamoring and freaking out when they paved the way and did nothing. I find that appalling. And now they're all self-righteously trying to bring peace. Brigadier General, can I hear from you? I know I'm not the moderator, but your insights have to be fabulous.
Thank you very much. It's an honor that you recognize me, and it's an honor to hear from two Nobel laureates. This is the first time in my life that I've heard direct from two Nobel laureates from the West. Pardon me saying sir and madam. I'll be slightly blunt in my understanding. Maybe my understanding is short. We have seen in our lifetime few major conflict or war. I won't say conflict. Vietnam War. I was a kid in school, and we have seen what has happened with the use of napalm, a bomb, which was then, I think it was banned, but the US used it right and left. I'm sure it must be also haunting your mind if you have seen those photographs in your time. Then we saw a war in Afghanistan, how a country, the whole country, has been ravaged. And the war was absolutely between two superpowers, a proxy war, and then occupation of Afghanistan for 20 years. And I believe, as I read, about 130,000 civilians and others have been killed, including children and women. And the half of the country has become refugees, staying all over Central Asia. Then we saw the Iraq war, how so to say, a secular country has been ransacked, in fact. And now we are seeing the Syrian civil war, which is there for 10 years. And we see Arsalan floating in the dead body is floating in the water. Pardon me saying that not much has been talked about as much as we are now seeing as the Ukraine conflict or Ukraine war, whatever you may call it. Putin is a bad man. Russia has never been a democratic country. Russia has never been a tolerant society, right from the, I would say, the Tsar time, right from the establishment till Putin. But what are we seeing today is the Western countries' behavior. Now, why you know and I know why this war has come to this. Who are this Azov battalion who has been trained by USA to kill the Russian language people in Donbass and Donetsk. And then making Ukraine is almost a new NATO member and putting all the weapons in their hand, NATO weapons in their hand. It is almost unwritten NATO member in the belly of Russia. Now, what has happened with this war? We see that the refugees are being, as you said, being treated differently. The Ukrainian refugees can work anywhere in Europe, but the refugees from Syria or refugee from Iraq or refugee from Afghanistan cannot have the working permit. Now, this war, what is already being done? And I'm sure that by the war ends, there will be multipolar worlds. The world is not going to be anymore between Russia and USA. We are seeing in South Asia, probably today, the UK foreign minister and the Russian foreign minister is visiting India. And Mr. Imran Khan is said to be in difficulty because he has sided with Russia. And India is trying to establish India, China, Russia, perhaps, I don't know, a kind of a union. So what we are seeing that a war which is already divided between black and white. Now, my question is to both. This war could have been prevented when in the last 14 months, when USA was sending its special brigade to train the Azov battalions in Ukraine and arming Ukraine against Russia. It could have been probably saved because Western country, Europe and America is said to be a democratic country. Russia is not. And today we are listening to one-sided Western explanations. We're not listening what Russians have to say here sitting. So what I'm trying to say is could have been prevented had we talked much before when all these things were going on in Ukraine. Do you think so, Madam?
Today you need to unmute yourself. Yeah.
I am Rich. You answered this one.
I've always been a great believer in diplomacy because one of the things that really works well is the international movement that supports science. Scientists from all countries get on really well. We have arguments all the time, but we don't find it necessary to shoot one another in order to show that we're the top scientists. We use logic, we use common sense, we use good science. And very often, scientists have been able to breach problems and stop problems, and the diplomats have failed to, because diplomats have to follow the line of their government. They don't have the freedom to speak their minds in the way in which scientists do. I spent a lot of time in Russia during the Cold War, and it was the scientific visits that enabled the Russian scientists to learn what was really going on, and then they could spread the word around. Now it's much easier to do that using social media and using the internet. But nevertheless, diplomacy is a very good thing. And I agree totally with what was just said. Sorry. Okay, stopped it. Sorry about that. I agree totally with what was just said, that the West has been very provocative in many, many, many cases. And we have set a very bad example for Russia or for anybody else when we invade Iraq, when we invade other countries. The Brits too, during the colonial era, have absolutely nothing to boast about for the most part, because they subjugated the people that they went into. And this idea of autocracy leading people to think that they can do whatever they want is a very bad thing, which is one of the reasons I'm totally opposed to autocracy. I think this is not a good thing. If it if you could find good, benevolent dictators, that would be great. But unfortunately, pretty much all benevolent dictators, when they start, soon become non-benevolent and they become autocratic. So I'm a great believer in democracy. It's not an especially good system, but it's the very best that we have, and we should really pursue that. In the present case, though, I do believe there would have been a possibility by letting Russia know from the very start, when they began to invade Crimea and then went into the rest of Ukraine, what the consequences would be if they did that. And I think if NATO had been at all effective, they would have made it quite clear that this was going to be unacceptable and the consequences were not what Russia would want. But we didn't. We sat back and let it happen. We waited until we saw large numbers of Ukrainians dying, and then we speak up and decide, well, we're going to try and promote diplomacy. Diplomacy has to be done ahead of time, not after all of this starts.
All right. Thank you very much.
Necessary to do it now.
Oh, thank you
Sorry,
very much.
I'm just going to say it's necessary to do it now, but we failed at the time when it would have been most appropriate.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. We have received quite a few interesting questions in the chat box, but before that, Kausar Ahmed and Professor Nuruzzaman wanted to say something, and may I request Professor Nuruzzaman and Kausar Ahmed to share their views very briefly.
Thank you so much, Professor Ishad, for this opportunity. Hi, Jody. Very good morning from Winnipeg, the place you visited a while ago. And thank you, Richard, for a very enlightened speech. I just have a quick question to both of you. What do you see the role of United Nations, particularly regarding the concept of responsibility to protect? And do you see any, I mean, in this case, how do we really go to somewhere to seek redress in terms of just outright aggression? I mean, maybe there'll be a second case in the future. So what do you see? Thank you.
Was that for me or for Jody?
Anyone
How
can jump in. I
aggression
mean,
be stopped?
we just need your insights on this particular UN role.
Okay,
thank you.
Why don't you go ahead, Jody?
Sure. One thing that I've been reading about a lot lately, I'm part of a group looking at the need to reestablish multilateralism, to rebuild global governance structures, which I would question if we ever had them, but I think we really need them now more than ever. And if we learn anything from this invasion, it should be that we must interact as a global community. I find the phrase international community a whole thing, and it doesn't really mean anything because there isn't one, as we see from the United Nations. Could you tell me your question again? I was writing a response to a chat and
no problem. So I was wondering about United Nations role in intervention, because we do have a protocol which is known as responsibility to protect. In 2006, Canada was the lead country to propose. So we do have protocol in place, but why can't we enforce it? Why can't we use it through the United Nations? Thank you.
I could go off on the United Nations now, but I won't, because that would be an entirely different discussion. It was mentioned that I led a fact-finding mission on Darfur, and I was appalled by diplomatic representatives from various countries at the response. They tried to shut me up because our report said things that no quote unquote diplomat would say, right? They all protect each other because nobody wants a delegation going to their country to find negative things. It was all it did was underscore my belief that the UN is corrupt, and it really, really needs either renovation, renewal, or it needs to be put aside, and there needs to be a new structure representative of the world as it is today, not after World War II. If one wanted a peace force, it would have, in my view, and again, in terms of the group that I'm part of, one of the areas that some are looking at is an international peace force. But that could only happen if there were an international structure that had the power over decisions about deploying the peace force, right? The reason that the Perm 5 don't want to see that happen is because it would impinge upon their own military power, right? You know, I've always been hesitant about an international peace force, but maybe it would be a good transition element to global governance structures that actually work and actually listen to everybody. But it's hard to know, you know? Makes me nervous anytime I think about people with guns and nukes and, you know.
Thank you, Jody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Rich,
From
would you like to?
Winnipeg.
Rich, would you like to respond to Kausar Ahmed's question as well briefly?
Well, I think I already made my views known about the United Nations when I spoke. I think that because of the way that it is organized at the moment, with Russia being able to, and China being able to veto almost anything they choose, it really isn't working. We need a new organization that is going to do something. The one comment I would make is that when this does end with Ukraine, I really believe that Russia should be pressured into providing the money that is needed to rebuild Ukraine. And an easy way to do that would be to seize the assets of the oligarchs, much of which is already seized, and just give that money to Ukraine. I think that would send quite a powerful message to anybody who was contemplating doing the same thing. You know, unfortunately, one of the things that we've reached in this society is that the amount of money you have seems to impress everybody with how smart you are. And I think taking some of it away would be a very good thing. For instance, if Jeff Bezos went and stayed up in space and left his money behind, that could do a lot of good.
All right. Thank you very
so
much. I see that the chat box is being flooded with questions and comments, and I will definitely try my best to pick up the questions for our two Nobel laureates. But before that, I would like to give the floor to Professor Nuruzzaman from North South University now to share his comments very briefly, and if he has any questions for the Nobel laureates, and then I'll come back to the question again.
Okay, thank you very much. I am Mohammed Nuruzzaman, Professor of International Relations at North South University. So as a professor, I have been dealing with these issues, complex issues of war and peace, violence, etc., for a long time. But we, the general people, would like to get rid of war, but the situation is completely different. It is not that easy. So I think that, Jody, you made two excellent points that we want positive peace. And in order to have positive peace, we need to fight back the long enduring, long persisting socioeconomic problems in different parts of the world. So welcome for making this a particular point. And secondly, you said that to avoid war, we need to change our mindset. And we need to see whether we can do anything with the desire for power by certain leaders. It may be the Vladimir Putin, it may be George W. Bush, anybody. So, but the question is whether it is really personal power or the power of the state or national power, what we call it. So throughout history, we have seen that personal desire for power has been actually mingled with national desire for power, and Hitler did that explicitly during and before the Second World War. So I think that as humans, we are really very aggressive, unfair, and very cruel. We would like to have our objectives realized.
I think we're having some sound problems.
In global politics. So Vladimir Putin may be blamed for this war, but he is not solely responsible for this war. NATO has a role here. The EU has a role here. So we need to be objective, in my opinion, to analyze and better understand this particular war. And your last point, I think, about positive peace. And my question to both of you, because you both are from American peace activist intellectuals. So the US has also been involved in negative peace, conflicts, and wars more than any other state in this world. So my question to you, how can you actually educate the American leadership, change the American foreign policy in favor of positive peace? So that's my question to both of you, and thank you very much.
I laugh out loud.
Yep.
I can't remember too many cases in which those in power voluntarily give it up. Perhaps Buddha is the only example. There are a few others, of course. I really believe that those in power will not voluntarily shift their point of view. They have to be made to shift their point of view. And that takes coordinated campaigns to make change. I've seen some comments that some people are aggravated that we're not laying out exact steps to bringing about change. To me, the point of this exercise is to bring different thinking about how one might bring about change. It is up to the people who are listening to take ideas that appeal to them and turn them into action. I mean, if we want an action-centered discussion, that's a totally different thing. I could certainly expound for hours on how we brought 1,300 organizations together, starting out with one staff person, me, and 2 NGOs, to create the International Campaign to Ban Landmines, that in 5 years' time got a treaty, which inspired the 2008 treaty to ban cluster bombs, which inspired the work to get the nuclear treaty. Everybody knows that that is a work in progress. Nobody thought suddenly with the nuclear treaty, we would see, whew, the weapons gone. Those in the campaign itself recognize that it's, a first step toward the possibility of. But it was the first successful effort to have a, conversation about banning them. All the other nuclear work has always made me somewhat unwell because it demonstrates those in power with the weapons will obfuscate, talk BS, do nothing, and pretend that they're making advances to change. They have power, and their power is backed up by nukes, It is the responsibility of all of us to make it different, vote differently, become active in political campaigns, join, political parties that actually care about humanity. one can't spell it out, but there are multitudinous ways to contribute to change. Read about it. There's an organization I've worked with for 25 years. It's called Peace Jam. I have a hard time with the name because what the hell does Peace Jam mean? The guy who started it was a punk rocker. And so he, jammed. So he decided we could jam for peace. And I think there are 10 Nobel Peace Laureates that are part of it. And it's had a significant impact globally on helping young people understand the multitudinous ways one can contribute to peace. No one person will change this world. It will happen when we communicate, collaborate, share ideas, use the ones that work best, but that's everybody's responsibility. It's no one person's responsibility to tell people how to do it. Read, meet with other organizations that are doing it. It will take a lot of pressure to put the autocrats out of power, as we see Mr. Trump tried to, embrace autocracy in trying to overthrow the US government, for God's sake. He should be in prison. He should have been in prison when he was president, but that's a separate issue. I honestly think about it all the time. Who in power gives up power? As I say, Buddha did. There have been a few, presidents and people in power who have. But power is, as we all know, a massive intoxicant. I get intoxicated with my power. And then I really do begin to believe I know better than anybody else. That's Mr. Putin trying to reestablish the glory of the Soviet Union and Greater Russia. Read some books about Greater Russia. It was not so damn glorious, just like the United States history is not glorious. We were born on genocide. The United States has invaded more countries in the world than any other country. I think that we've had perhaps 34, there is a professor at the university, the Evergreen University in Washington. He has made a list of every intervention, military and CIA overthrow in the history of my country. There have been approximately, last time I looked at this list, 34 years of non-intervention in the entire history of the establishment of the United States. And they're not consecutive. And yet people in this country believe that we're benevolent and good and free and all that business. We have to fight to help people accept the reality of their history. People don't want to, right? History is part myth and part reality. We never talk about the genocide of the Native Americans here because it doesn't fit the myth. Thanksgiving is the absurdity that is practiced because it fits the myth. The Statue of Liberty fits the myth. Reality does not fit the myth. We need people to have the courage to face realities and give up the myths. To take down people in power, not take them down, that sounds violent. To change the power structures in states as well as in the world. That's my view.
Okay, thank you very much, Jody. Moving to the next question. Why terrorism committed by ISIS, Al-Qaeda are labeled as Islamic terrorism, but terrorism committed by Azov Battalion or other Christian, white supremacist group aren't labeled as Christian terrorism? I see Judy has addressed this question on the chat box, but Rich Roberts, would you like to say anything to respond to this question?
I'm not sure that I feel fully qualified to be able to answer a question like that. I think we have all engaged in terrorist activities in the West, and we find it acceptable when we do it and unacceptable when other people do it. I think the one thing I would like to say is something of a response to the previous conversation about how are we going to solve some of these problems of bringing peace within the world. And I think the answer is we need to do a much better job of educating our children. And we need to make sure that the kids, who usually, typically, they're pretty peaceful, they like one another, they play together, they get on well, race is not an issue, where they come from is not an issue. Kids get on pretty well. If they are given a good education, then I think they grow up and can change the world. And very often they can change their parents' views of things. And so I think if we focused a little more on the kids and made sure they had a very good education that included a lot about the benefits of peace, we would see a better world emerge.
Okay, we are heading to the end of this program very soon, but before that, I'll be able to take two more questions. And one of them is, how is Ukrainians resisting Russian occupation are freedom fighters, but Palestinian people resisting Israeli occupation are terrorists. Lebanese people resisting Israeli occupation were terrorists. Afghani people resisting USA plus NATO's occupation were terrorists. Iraqi people resisting UK plus US's occupation were terrorists. Any of you would like to address this question?
It's pretty obvious, isn't it? The United States supports Israel, ergo, Palestinians who oppose the US and Israel are terrorists. The United States invades Iraq, ergo, anybody who opposes the invasion is a terrorist. Same in any invasion by the US. And of course, the same now with Russia. People who dare to protest against this invasion are being put in prison, tortured, etc. Those in power decide the rules of what's acceptable and what isn't. And if it's not acceptable, you're a terrorist. You know, was it Jane Addams was the first woman to receive the Nobel Peace Prize, first American woman. And she was the CIA, all the intelligence agencies' files on her were massive. And she was considered the most dangerous woman in the United States because she was a powerful speaker on peace. So she was dangerous because this country is not peaceful. She was an intellectual terrorist. I know that they started spying on me when I worked in Central America. I don't know how I have been named, but I know I'm not a popular figure with the US government. Do I care? Not a bit. I do not care. If I cared, I'd be a diplomat and allow me to laugh.
Anything from Rich Roberts?
No, I think I agree completely that the term terrorist is always in the hands of the powerful. The powerful will decide who is going to be a terrorist and who isn't. And it's sad. It really is very sad. And I think for me, one of the saddest parts of it is that a country such as the US, which could have done really well because of the power that they managed to acquire, and because they are in principle a democracy, could have done such a much better job of spreading peace around the world instead of spreading war and other things. They were not that good. But, I have to say Britain had a very similar problem. For many years, they colonized everywhere they could, and I would actually maybe challenge Jody on the number of countries that the Brits destroyed or caused problems with. I think that may have exceeded those of the US, but then they had two millennia of being able to do it.
That's why they won't give up their nukes today, because if they did, nobody would listen to them, along with the French.
Yeah, well, I think it's the French they're most worried about.
You're joking, I assume.
Yes.
I hope so. It's one wimp against another. But they have nukes.
Mhm.
All right, so we are coming to the end of this webinar, but I see there is still one hand raised by one of the participants, Ikram Sadi. So can you please be very brief with your question or comment? Mr. Ikram Sadi.
Irshad, you can go for the next our designated speakers. His mic is not working probably.
I think he might have connectivity issues. So with the previous response, we wrap up the question answer session, and my sincere apologies again for leaving some questions unanswered due to time constraints. Now, I'd like to request Mr. Azimuddin Ahmed, Chairman, Board of Trustees of North-South University Trust, to share his comments with us.
Sir, if you can unmute yourself.
Yes, right now I can. Right now I can.
Ikram, we
Yes,
have already
it is
covered.
unmuted.
Yeah,
No.
please.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So can I ask the question,
Now,
please?
Ikram, it is over now. So we have
All
gone to the second speaker. Yeah.
Thank you.
Respected Nobel laureates, Honorable Judy William and Sir Richard John Roberts, Vice Chancellor of North-South University, Professor Atiqul Islam, Editor of the Daily Pratham Alo, Mr. Matiur Rahman, all other distinguished participants, my dear faculty members, students and audience from home and abroad, Assalamu alaikum and good evening. It is my great pleasure to see how Center for Peace Studies, CPS of North-South University and South Asian Institute of Policy Governance has been actively engaged in the discussions, reflections, and sharing of views and concern on issues related to violation of human rights and reclaiming its peace. NSU is highly honored today because of the virtual presence of two great Nobel laureates in this very special program organized by North-South University and Pratham Alo. North-South University is the first private university in Bangladesh, which was established by a group of philanthropists, industrialists, and civil servants and academics with a vision to be a center of excellence in higher education and with the mission to produce highly skilled manpower and also the visionary leaders. NSU always puts its efforts in connecting people both for education and research and for contributing in making peace in the society. The presence of two honorable Nobel laureates and a large number of audience from all over the world in today's webinar shows that the initiative of NSU on peace building are well recognized and supported by all who want to be a part of peace. This international webinar is timely and relevant to the context. Finally, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to Pratham Alo for being the partner of this event A special thanks to our guests and the audience of today. NSU will continue in organizing similar programs in future, and I hope we will have you with us in our endeavor of establishing peace locally and globally. I once again thank the two Nobel laureates, one who is our very dear and close friend, Rich Roberts. He has blessed with his visit North-South University several times. I am grateful to both of them for visiting us in this webinar today. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, respected Chair of Board of Trustees of North-South University. Now is the time to hear from the Chair of the webinar, Professor Atikul Islam, Vice Chancellor of North-South University.
Honorable Jody Williams, I'll call my friend Rich Roberts, Chair of Board of Trustees of North-South University, Mr. Azimuddin Ahmed, my colleagues from North-South University, friends from overseas, Mr. Matiur Rahman, the editor of Pratham Alo, one of the most reliable, objective newspapers that you can in this country. Ladies and gentlemen, I am by profession a bean counter. My knowledge of politics is close to zero, and my knowledge of world politics is even worse. Now, I won't give you a long sort of a delivery in front of you. Let me say some, as a bystander, let me make some observations. It is my feeling that the United Nations that we know is not functional. It needs to be either refurbished or it needs to be demolished, honestly. And to a great extent, the same thing applies to the International Court of Justice. These are institutions that are dominated by few members who abstain to stay away from one or exercise their veto power in the other. They will wield their veto, yes, to do this, we'll veto it. Now, I don't know who gave them this veto power, why the General Council cannot be empowered a bit more, where the whole world speaks. The Security Council is the one that can order you any action of any sort. I wonder whether the leadership, people that lead the world, have thought about what would happen if a weaker country like Ukraine is invaded by a stronger power like Russia. What would be the role of China in the United Nations and outside? What would be the sort of stance of India within the United Nations outside? What would be the stance of Brazil inside and outside? What would be, to what extent, some of them who are crying foul would get support from their own friends? Forget about these so-called sanctions. We have seen them. They are not sufficient enough deterrent. Had anyone studied Putin's psychology, how would he react in a particular situation? Did anyone track the Russian attitude towards anything like this? If Putin
invades Ukraine. Are the Russians going to say he's doing a great job for us? He's finishing our unfinished job. Was there any thought that if increasingly you take more, you give membership to the East European nations in the NATO and in the European community, what would be the line that Putin, in his crazy view, would put? That's the red line. You cross this or backside the wall, so the polar bear cannot take it anymore, jumps. Okay. Was there any study at what point Putin would do this? Now, I can see that there was no plan about these things. If you did really want to think of using power, then in my view, it should have been used when Crimea was annexed to to Russia. So if you didn't use power then, it's too late now. What I understand, their simple feeling is that now you have come very close to us. We feel uncomfortable. You have been, positioning missiles in there that can target most of our cities. So we feel unsafe. So was there any thought, if they felt that way, given that Putin is the man, given the United Nations is somewhat less than functional, given the track record of some of the countries, do they have the legitimacy to talk about these issues? These empty words of human rights, they're remembered when we need it. When we need to kill all the Aborigines in Australia, it's survival of the fittest. When the communists curtail people's rights, all human rights are at threat. So, you've got to have a consistency to be believable, to have the legitimacy in the eye of the world. You haven't got it. Those who cry foul mostly. And so, I don't think, sorry, let me not give a conclusion here. So I feel that those things should have been considered before taking any position. And I still feel that the world is not led by visionaries. The world is led by people like Donald Trump, people like Viktor Orban. I won't name anyone closer to our place. And there is a fear, genuine fear in some countries, that if big countries can get away by doing these things on their small neighbors, where do we stand? If, we know that most of the big powers have targets. It can be, I want this one, this country is part of me, so I'm giving them the option to join us. If not, one day we'll do it. So those who have that kind of thing in mind, those big powers that are surrounded by small nations, do you think they will be on the side of humanity and sovereignty, this sort of thing? They might give you lip service, but at heart they'll say, okay, let Russia get away with this one, then I might do the other one that I have in mind. So I think in the interest of humanity, in the interest of the majority of citizens of this globe, we should do something. But do we have the legitimacy to do it? Did we plan it? Did you have a contingency plan? Did you study the parties involved? I think there's lots of things lacking. And okay, so I won't delve into international politics anymore. Let me do my duty by thanking our Center for Peace Studies for organizing this. And Pratham Alo, this particular newspaper has been a partner of us in so many good things. Let me thank them, and I thank profusely our two Nobel laureate guests for dignifying us program, for bringing so much into this. And I would like to welcome you physically if we had that situation. Since it's not there at this moment, I thank you for joining us on this webinar. And it was so nice to hear from you, your initial comments, plus your question and answers. People like you show that there is conscience still. People like you are the only protection against rising dictators everywhere. And I take my hat off to both of you. And let me thank everyone, all the people that asked questions and everyone who else helped in different ways. Thanks also to our Sheikh Tawfiq. Normally, I don't remember him to thank the CPS and the SFG for organizing it. I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. It was great to hear from you. Now we'll hear closing remarks from the editor of the Daily Prothom Alo, Mr. Mutiur Rahman. As I mentioned at the beginning, the Daily Prothom Alo is the highest circulated newspaper in Bangla, and the Prothom Alo is the partner in this webinar. Mr. Mutiur Rahman, please.
Thank you. I'll take 2 minutes. It has been an honor to be the part of this wonderful event. And heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed two guests to lecture and two Nobel laureates. Thank you very much. And I'm sure our readers, viewers certainly have benefited from the discussion that took place. And we'll carry our news tomorrow morning in the newspapers, and we'll carry in our online digital platform and also in the English online section of our newspapers. And actually, I'd like to thank all of you to present here to making this event a success. And for me, there are a couple of things which I can say is takeaway for me is number one, as Judy Williams mentioned, get up, act, stop, and make world a better place. There is an important message for us to think, to act. And also, she also mentioned, there is a role for everyone to change for good in the society, in the country, in the world. So these are two very important messages for me to take away. And from Richard Roberts, activism is a good thing. I fully agree with that message. I take it very seriously. And the second, the role of the young people is very important, and is suggested for the young people to use the social media, which the young people of Bangladesh and the other countries, they're using it. And we hope they will be using it for positive things, for good things. And third is a difficult, but also I'm in favor of and thinking of an alternative of the United Nations organizations. So thank you all. Thank you very much. And thank you our two guest speakers and all the friends and those who participated in our seminar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Moti Bhai, for your kind presence and these encouraging words. Based on the keynote speech and the discussions we have had today, clearly war is a choice. There are multiple ways to avoid war, and we all know about them. Today's webinar was an effort to remind us that we all are capable to stand beside humanity. And CPS has been working towards that. I hope CPS will have Honorable Jody Williams and Sir Richard Roberts in person in Bangladesh in our continuous journey of building peace in future. With these words, we end our webinar today. Thanks very much to everyone for joining us. Peace be upon you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ishaq.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Jody, next time we want you here in Bangladesh in person.
That would be
Hi,
fun.
Jody. Yeah, that would be fun. A lot of fun. Yeah, that would be fun. And we are seriously planning to bring you here, Bangladesh, at some point, maybe next year or other time.
Okay.
Yeah, please just stay with us. That would be really
I
wonderful.
know
We need your insight.
Halal won't let me off the hook.
Sure. Okay.
Bye, people.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye,
Thanks.
everyone.
Bye. Bye. Can close the event, our technical team.